emotional and behavioral disorders, or inability to learn not due to intellectual, sensory, or health factors, an inability to maintain satisfactory relationships, inappropriate behavior or feelings, or pervasive mood of depression or unhappiness, and physical symptoms or fears. The behavior is chronic, unacceptable, and extreme. Just remember the word Q. C for chronic, U for unacceptable, and E for extreme. When looking at the intelligence score sheet, the intelligence score, the average of human is 100. Moving over to the right, you will see the score about 115. This score is one standard deviation, or in terms of this IQ chart, 15 point higher than the average. So this person, if they had a score of 115, will have a high average of IQ. And if we go over to the left hand side, the score is 85, which is 15 point lower than the average score of 100. Meaning, if this person score at 85, it means that they have a low average IQ score. The important thing to remember is that scores from 85 through 115 are all considered an average IQ score. And when looking at the students who has EBD, they typically lay into low and low average range, which is a score of 90 and below. There are students who make an indelible mark in school not for their good performance in academic work, but for their undesirable and unacceptable behavior that violates school rules and regulations. These are boys and girls who are often sent to guidance office for various reasons. For example, bad conduct that disrupt class activities, aggressive behavior and physical attack on their classmates, stealing, lack of manners and respect towards all people, as well as peers and similar behavior problems. These children youth are referred to as emotionally disturbed, socially maladjusted with emotional and behavioral disorders, or simply with behavior problems. The usual reaction of the most people to children who manifest behavior problems range from reprimand, scolding, punishment, dislike, rejections, hatred to pity. These children find it very difficult to maintain interpersonal relationship with their parents, siblings, school authorities, teachers, and classmates. They tend to violate home and school rules and regulations, and often into difficult situations. They find difficult to be around people. The aforementioned labels are found in the area of emotional and behavioral disorders, or EBD, as one recalls certain experiences about children and youth who fit the above descriptions. A number of questions and issues cross one's mind. What are emotional and behavioral disorders? When may a children be described as with emotional and behavioral disorder? What are the characteristics, types, and potential causes of EBD? And what are the assessment tools and procedures are used to determine the presence of EBD? What educational intervention can help these children? This article on bullying was written by Lam Lai Ching, shows how serious the problem has become in Asia. Research shows that bullied children often fail to focus on their studies. Juan Reyes summed up Holly's courage as he walked through the yard of his Manila secondary school in November 2021. An older, larger boy had picking on the 12-year-old for weeks. He had teased one mercilessly, calling him crybaby in front of other kids. When one had asked his tormentor to stop, the bully had responded, "Why should I?" Now, one finally decided to confront the bully. "Why do you keep insulting me?" he nervously asked the bigger boy. The bully responded by grabbing him by the collar and shaking him. A brief fist fight ensued before a school employee broke them up. Moments later, the bully clutched his chest and fell to the ground dead. An autopsy later revealed that the boy died of a heart attack brought on by an undiagnosed heart condition. Weeping and covered in bruises, one told an investigator after the fight, "He kept on teasing me. This is the only time I stood for myself. And look what happened." One was charged with homicide and jailed for 3 days. He was released on bail. The case is pending. The tragedy is that the boy death and one anguish could have been prevented. However, schools, parents, and even the students themselves are not doing enough to address the problem of bullying. According to an executive Reader's Digest poll of 2,500 parents of secondary children, 5 cities bullying is all too common in Asia. Nearly 1 in 5 responded knew of bullying at their child's school in the past year. Effective steps to beat the bullies. For children, don't show distress. It gives the bully an emotional payoff. Second, don't be a witness. If you see bullying happening, walk away. It implies disapproval and weakness the bully's position by removing unessential audience. And there are also effective steps to beat the bullies for parents. First, build self-confidence. Bullied children often feel somehow to blame for the situation. A healthy self-esteem allows them to behave in a position but controlled manner. Second, strengthen friendships. Encourage children to make a new friendship who can give moral support. Third, seek expert to help. First, make an appointment to see your child's teachers. Bring a written report to the bullying incidents and set a mutually agreed time limit for actions to take effect.
Hello everyone, good morning. I am Jessary Haldare and this is the influence of the physical and sociocultural environment on personality development. Have you ever wondered why there are children and youth who are satisfied and pleased with their lives? Who have adapted to their home situations? Who adore their families? Who live the values of dignity and affection for others? Who follow school rules? Who take their studies seriously as stepping stones to a good future? Who have a large number of friends, and who infect others in the good behavior? On the other hand, what about the children and youth who are unhappy with their lives? Have you ever thought about them? The youths that break home and school rules and regulations, show disrespect and hatred for their parents and teachers, associate with questionable characters such as neighborhood toughies, thieves, drug abusers and pushers, and criminal elements in the community. It is true that we are uniquely different. We have different tastes, different personalities, behaviors, attitudes, reactions, dreams, motivations, goals, and opinions. But we all have humanity. And as a normal human being, either we are raised with a complete family or a single mother, father, or those who was raised by their siblings, their uncles, aunts, grandparents, or legal guardians, or even not at all. We all have the capability of understanding what is happening around us. There is a part of us that is gradually learning. We all have the power to adapt and adjust in different environments, even for a child. And I think that's one of the reasons why we all have differences. Because we are used to an environment that we learn to adapt to. Later on, it reflects in the way we see things, feel things, and appreciate things. The variations in human behavior are influenced by the basic determinants of personality development. First, the person's genetic background or heredity. Second, environmental factors. And third, the general patterning of development. Usually, the clan and family teach its members to conform to certain practices and traditions. Parents teach their children to behave in ways that are appropriate to their social status. Parents who are doctors, engineers, teachers, politicians, and other professionals want at least one of their children to follow their footsteps. For example, a politician. Of course, if you're a politician, you have to keep your image as clean as possible. Although wala namang malinis talaga na known politicians, they all have flaws. But in order to attract, Politicians tend to create a safe and engaging environment for the people to like them. And if they want their child or children to follow their footsteps, some politicians are likely making their children to focus on their academics, or maybe focus on a particular activity that they are good at, and they raise high expectations so that people can see and appreciate how good they are in managing their children. People will think na, if ganyan siya kagaling sa mga anak niya, how much more sa community natin? How much more can he give? Wala na sa usapan ang bata. They are just a simple instrument that can be used to attract. And that child might start to develop behavioral problems that aren't there in the first place. It was caused by how the child adjusted or what was being told to do. And that's the problem. A person is expected to follow various social roles demanded by society. A person conforms to the role demands if he or she receives positive reinforcement such as money, prestige, and status. On the other hand, negative reinforcement like punishment, deprivation of status, and loss of prestige lead to nonconformist behavior. The favorable and unfavorable elements in both physical and socio-cultural environments strongly foster the person's value patterns and attitudes. As a result, different environments shape different personality characteristics. As what I said, it is how we adapt talaga, and how we are being affected by our environment. Either nakakatulong siya or nakakasama sa atin, especially dahil madadala natin yun sa ating paglaki. Personality development is very much influenced by a person's socialization experiences. Ideally, social roles should be clear and comfortable for the person, so dapat ay klaro at komportable para sa isang tao. However, social roles can be conflicting, unclear, and not understood, so that the end results are misunderstanding, quarrel, discomfort, negative feelings, and unhealthy attitudes. In such cases, a person's personality development and adjustment patterns may be impaired. Sad to say, there's a lot of people that are physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally wrecked and changed, all because of the cruel environment that they are in. At a very young age, they lost their childhood, they lost their happiness, missed the moments and experiences they were supposed to feel, and some of them can't even remember what it was like. All because of the massive changes they've been through. It is important to remember that while heredity or genetic endowment provides the potential for a favorable and positive biological and psychological environment, the person's way of thinking, selecting options, making decisions, feeling, and acting are heavily influenced by the physical and sociocultural environments. Now we are here at adaptive and maladaptive behavior. Adaptive behavior refers to a person's behavior patterns that have desirable consequences and foster his or her well-being and ultimately that of the group. From the word adaptive, it means having the ability or tendency to adapt to different situations. Now, adaptive behaviors are learned behaviors that reflect an individual's social and practical competence to meet the demands of everyday living. To meet the demands of their environments, each person must learn a set of skills. Ito ay natutunang pag-uugali na nagpapakita ng praktikal na kakayahan ng isang individual upang matugunan ang mga pangangailangan sa araw-araw na pamumuhay. Pinangangalagaan nila ang kanilang sariling pag-unlad at kung paanong paraan nila gustong mamuhay at gustong maramdaman. The term well-being means that the person works towards growth, fulfillment, and actualization of his or her potential. It is the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. This focuses on the bright side of growing. This is great because it values how you want yourself to grow, what kind of you want to be, kung anong gusto mong maging, paano mo gusto ibahagi ang sarili mo sa kanila, o anong kaligayahan ang gusto mong matamasa. Nasa kamay ng isang tao ang kanilang kaligayahan. It includes having good mental health, high life satisfaction, a sense of meaning or purpose, and ability to manage stress. Generally, well-being is just feeling well. On the other hand, behavior is maladaptive if it results in negative and undesirable consequences and interferes with the person's optimal functioning and growth. Maladaptive behavior is behavior that prevents you from making adjustments that are in your own best interest. Avoidance, withdrawal, and passive aggression are examples of maladaptive behaviors. It is completely the opposite of the previous one. Not only does it have negative consequences, but it doesn't give the person the growth they deserve. Maladaptive behavior can result when a person just does not see a path to their desired future. This can happen with any chronic illness or major lifestyle change. With maladaptive behavior, self-destructive actions are taken to avoid undesired situations. One of the most used maladaptive behaviors is avoidance. The use of the term maladaptive rather than abnormal puts the focus on the behavior rather than the person, by which means implying the possibility for improvement. Maladaptive behavior includes any behavior that has undesirable consequences for the individual as well as for the group. Behavior problems, emotional and behavioral disorders are manifestations of maladaptive behavior. The patterning of personality development. Coleman and others 1980 stated that children's personality development is shaped differently in different sociocultural settings. However, there are specific and interrelated trends in development that are universal in nature. The first one is dependence to self-direction. The normal progression is seen in the fetus and the newly born infant who are totally dependent on their mother and family members until the toddler begins to explore the environment on his or her own. The child develops into an adolescent and into an independent adult. Bound up with this growth toward independence and self-direction is the development of a clear sense of personal identity and the acquisition of information, competencies, and values. Like us when we were young, as sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters, we used to be dependent most especially on the people that took care of us. We wanted to be fed. We can't do it ourselves because we don't know how it's supposed to work. And even traveling. It's very rare to see a kid traveling on their own, so as a child, we are dependent on those who know the way to go and the way back. We can't do it ourselves. We can't travel or go to places without someone's guidance. But as we age and become teens or young adults, we already have the urge to know, decide, and willingness to give ourselves the answers we wanted. We can just travel to different places on our own. The end goal of the individual is to be a person in his or her right. Sino ba naman ang hindi gustong mamuhay ng walang kumukontra, tumidikta at nagsasabi kung anong dapat nating gawin? Gusto nating mamuhay ng may natatamasang karapatan at paggalang sa ating mga desisyon. The second one is the pleasure to reality and self-control. Early behavior is governed by the pleasure principles advanced by Sigmund Freud. The human tendency is to seek pleasure and to avoid pain and discomfort. As the child matures, the reality principle takes over and the child realizes that he or she has to perceive and face reality. This means distinguishing between fantasy and reality, controlling impulses and desire, delaying immediate gratification in the interest of long-range goals, and learning to cope with the inevitable hurts, disappointments, and frustrations of living. The third one is ignorance to knowledge. Research data show that infants at birth are not like blank slates. We all heard and learned it as tabula rasa, where it just waits to be filled with knowledge, or something that is still, untouched, and an original state that has not yet been changed by people. Conversely, the infant is born with certain reflexive and instinctive behavior patterns. The first 2 years are characterized by the rapid acquisition of information about themselves and the world. With time, this information is organized into coherent patterns of assumptions concerning reality, possibility, and the value that provide a stable frame of reference for guiding behavior. The patterns of assumptions and frame of reference must be realistic, trustworthy, flexible, and relevant to the kinds of problems that a person will face. The fourth one is incompetence to competence. From birth onward to childhood and adolescence, the person masters the intellectual, emotional, social, and other competencies essential for adulthood. The person acquires skills in problem solving and decision making, learns to control his emotions and to use them for the enrichment of living, and learns to deal with others and to establish satisfying relationships. The fifth one is diffuse to articulated self-identity. The core self-identity gradually emerges as the infant differentiates himself or herself. The sex-typing responses of parents and adults produce an awareness of oneself as a boy or a girl. The reactions and feedback from people begin to provide the child with a sense of his or her own characteristics from good to bad. In the process, the child may suffer confusion because the input from the external sources of information may be inconsistent. Self-defined identity must be in keeping with the person's real internal characteristics. The significant achievements of one's self identity should be the establishment of a confident gender identity and a reasonable plan for one's future life by the end of the adolescent years. The individual who fails to achieve an articulated self identity, coherent selfhood, and self direction may bring incompetencies and immaturities to his or her adulthood. And finally, the last one, amoral to moral. Amoral is having or showing no concern about whether behavior is morally right or wrong. The act of amoral is a person who has no conscience or scruple. For example, stealing from the poor is an example of an amoral act. Moral, on the other hand, is conforming to a standard of what is right and good. It implies conformity to established sanctioned codes or accepted notions of right and wrong. Now, children learn very early in life that certain forms of behavior are right, good, correct, while others are bad, wrong, and incorrect to do. As they mature, they learn a pattern of value assumptions that operate as inner guides and controls of behavior, which Freud calls the superego or conscience in the psychoanalytic theory of behavior. Children tend to repel the good behavior taught to them at the beginning, but soon with increasing maturity, they learn to appraise them and to work out the value orientation of their own. The child's moral orientation, recognition, and appreciation of the rights of others, and of the differing views in the nature of reality and decency. Individual differences are observed in the rate and pace of personality development. Adults should guide the children and go through the process of personality development so that they can grow up to be self-regulating and self-directing persons well into adulthood. Individuals who are not able to gain the skills and competencies at the right stage of development become at risk for developing behavior problems, emotional and behavioral disorders. The importance of this topic is we are able to know about how people relate on how and why children and youths are being affected by something that could possibly change their paths and sees life in different ways. And it's enlightening for everyone to be understanding and be aware that we cannot just force anyone to believe and express what we have experienced and felt. We can't just blame others for being them. Also, we discovered that not all of it is caused by their environment or is shaped differently in sociocultural settings, but we go over the specific trends in development that are universal in nature. The influence of physical and sociocultural environment on personality development shows us how to understand everyone and every person we encounter. It gives us the proper way of understanding people with different behaviors and how we are adapting the environment we are in that has a great impact on how we are today. This will be the end of my report. Thank you for listening.
Good day, everyone. I am Ana Jane Gabato from Andrew 1YAMG09, BS Ed Science. My topic is Definition of Emotional and Behavioral Disorder. This is a number of definitions have been proposed. Psychologists and special education experts to date have not agreed on consistent and universal definition of emotional and behavioral disorder. This is the following reason by Howard. First, the disorder behavior in social construct. Social construct is a mental illness have formed through cultural and historical conversation between groups of individuals and not solely from a deficit within the individual. So there is no clear agreement as to the criteria and parameters of normal adaptive behavior and good mental health. Second, different theories of emotional disturbance use concept of terminology that do not present to a clear meaning of condition. Third, measuring and interpreting disordered behavior across time and settings is a difficult, exact, and costly endeavor. Fourth, cultural influence, expectation, and norms across ethics and cultural groups are often quite different. Fifth, frequency and intensity of disordered behavior are difficult to measure and control in view of the fact that children behave inappropriately at some times, and last, disordered behavior sometimes occurs in conjunction with other disabilities such as mental retardation and learning disabilities. So the emotional and behavioral disorder, this is an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationship with peers or teacher, such as aggression or self-injuries like acting out or di kaya makipag-away. Next is withdrawal, like not interacting socially with others because of the excessive fear of anxiety. Next is immaturity. Um, Inappropriate crying kay dili makuha ang ilang gusto, then short-tempered and mag-throw sila tantrums, and also poor coping skills. Next is the learning difficulties, academically performing below grade level. Several types of behavioral disorder, including the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, or oppositional defiant disorder or ODD, and lastly conduct disorder. So the behavioral disorder may involve in hyperactivity, impulsivity, drug use, and criminal activity. So in 2002, the definition of the most impact in special education in the United States was written by Ellie Bower in 1957. So however, Bower definition was criticized by its vagueness and subjectivity. Special education teachers asked for more specific indicators of satisfactory, normal, inappropriate, and pervasive interpersonal relationship. Later on, Bower's definition was revised and adopted by the U.S. Department of Education using the term seriously emotional disturbance. There are three factors were considered in determining if a child is emotional disturbant. These are intensity, pattern, and duration of behavior. First, the intensity refers to the severity of the child's problem. This factor is the easiest to identify if one is guided with these questions. First, how does it get in the way of the child's or society's goals? Like primary socialization occurs when the child learns the attitudes, values, and actions appropriate to individual as a members of a particular culture. It is mainly influenced by the immediate family and friends. Second, how much does it draw attention from others? Like rewards we can touch or they can touch, experience, or even just visualize have a greater impact of our attention or in their attention. Second, the pattern. Pattern means the time when the problem occurs. Like, do problems occur only during the school days? Only during the math class, science class, at home, or at bedtime? Answers of this question may yield very helpful diagnostic and remediation for the child's information. The third one is duration of behavior. Duration of behavior refers to the length of time of the child's problem has been present. This implies that continuous observation has to be made. Some special educators require the 3-month duration before they suggest that the child has emotional or behavioral problem. While there is no consensus yet as its universal definition, those adopted in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or the IDEA 1997 and the Council for Children with Behavioral Disorder or CCBD 1980 9 exert the most influential today. The IDEA definition of serious emotional disturbance by Howard 2003. IDEA, the public law on special education in America, defines serious emotional disturbance as a condition exhibiting one or more of following characteristics over a long period of time, and to be marked degree or severity which adversely affects the educational performance. These are the an inability to learn, which cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, and health factors, inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationship with peers and teachers, like mentioning excessive fears or anxiety, inappropriate types of behaviors or feelings under normal circumstances, a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, or a tendency to develop physical symptoms of fears associated with personal or school problems. The term includes children who are schizophrenic or autistic. The term does not include children who are socially maladjusted unless it is determined that they are seriously emotional disturbed. The IDEA definition clearly specifies three conditions that must be met: chronicity, severity, and difficulty in school. It lists five types of problems or characteristics that a child must serious emotional disturbance exhibit. So, schizophrenic is a serious mental disorder in which people interpret reality to abnormally. So, schizophrenic may result in some combination of hallucinations and delusions and extremely disordered thinking and behavior that impairs daily functioning and can be disabling. And schizophrenic may require lifelong treatment. However, teachers found the definition that vague and lacking in objectivity. There were no specific behavior indicators or interpersonal relationship that were satisfactory and normally, as opposed to those were inappropriate, pervasive. Likewise, there was no distinct between serious emotional disturbance and social maladjustment. Children with social maladjustment are not considered disabled and therefore are not qualified to be the special education program supported by the American government. The teacher felt that the IDEA definition left too much to the subjective opinion of authorities, especially the teachers who are involved in the assessment of the children suspected to be seriously emotional disturbed. Next is Council for Children with Behavioral Disorder or CCBD definition of emotional and behavioral disorder. In 1989, the Council for Children with Behavioral Disorder, or CCBD, the major professional organizations of special educators concerned with children with emotional and behavioral disorder, and the National Mental Health and Special Education Coalition wrote the following definition that is how incorporated in the public law of special education or IDEA. Emotional and behavioral disorder is a disability characterized by behavioral or emotional responses in a school programs, so different from appropriate age, cultural, or ethic norms that they adversely affect educational performance. Educational performance includes the development and demonstration of academic, social, vocational, and personal skills. Such disabilities is more than a temporary expected response to stressful events in the environment, is consistently exhibited in two different settings, at least one of which is school related, and unresponsive to direct intervention in general education or the child's condition is such the general education intervention would be difficult. This category may include children or youth with schizophrenic disorder, affective disorder, and anxiety disorder that sustain disturbance of conduct or adjustment when they are adversely affected educational performance. The literacy of the child's behavior may be long, that is, upon the prodding of the teacher. He or she withholds an inappropriate behavior, thinks about inappropriate behavior suggested by the teacher, and complies with the teacher's request, all within a span of time. Usually, a few of several minutes. On the other hand, the latency of the child's behavior may be very short, that is, he or she may immediately scream, throw tantrum, hit others, and the slightest provocation or frustration instead of taking time to consider more appropriate behaviors. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. And for today's lesson, we're going to talk about the classification of emotional and behavioral disorders. And by the way, I am Christiana Job Fertes from Section First Year Andrew GO2, taking up DS Ed Science. In emotional and behavioral disorders, we have four systems of classification. First is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. Next, we have the KEYS Statistical Classification. Third is the classification of direct observation and measurement. And lastly, we have the classification of degree of severity. Now, let us first discuss the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, or the DSM-4, or the 4th edition. Many of us feel anxious sometimes. Perhaps there are days that we feel sad and unmotivated to do much. However, having those feelings doesn't usually mean having a diagnosis of anxiety and depression. Now, what does qualify as a diagnosis? Now, that's where the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-4, comes in. The DSM is a book published by the American Psychiatric Association, which provides detailed criteria for the diagnosis of mental disorders. This is beneficial for two reasons. First, it offers a common language for researchers and psychologists to use when discussing patients' symptoms and research. Second, it provides a standard set of criteria for diagnosis. Now, the DSM-4 is an elaborate clinical classification system consisting of 230 separate diagnostic categories or labels to identify the various types of disordered behaviors as observed by psychiatrists, psychologists, mental health personnel, and other clinicians in their regular practice. Now, the classification lacks reliability as shown in the way clinicians classify the clients in different categories. Another criticism about the DSM-4 classification system is the lack of guidance for education and treatment. No useful information on intervention programs and therapies are available in the manual. Now, the American Psychiatric Association, which was the publisher of the DSM in 1994, enumerates three criteria that must be met in determining the presence of emotional and behavioral disorders, particularly among adults. First is the person experiences significant pain or distress, an inability to work or play, an increased risk of death, or a loss of freedom in important areas of life. That is the first. Second, we have the source of the problem lies within the person due to biological factors, learned habits, or mental processes, and is not simply a normal response to specific life events such as death of a loved one. And third, the problem is not deliberate reaction to conditions such as poverty, prejudice, government policy, or other conflicts with society. Now, while the APA addresses psychological disorders, the criteria are certainly applicable to other possible causes of emotional and behavioral disorders as well. Therefore, extra caution should be exercised to avoid hasty generalizations about who may exhibit some of these characteristics. Now, the criteria for disorders usually first diagnosed in infancy, childhood, or adolescence. However, that have been refined. Furthermore, there is more recognition in the adult section of the manual that children can be diagnosed with adult diagnosis. For example, the criteria in post-traumatic stress disorder give examples that can be used to evaluate children being considered for this diagnosis. Now, let's proceed to the second classification system, the quiz statistical classification. Now, in quiz statistical classification, Quiz and his colleagues collected a wide range of data on hundreds of children with emotional and behavioral disorders. Now, they asked parents and teachers to accomplish rating forms and questionnaires on the children's behavior and life histories. Now, the statistical analysis of data revealed 4 clusters of traits and behavioral among children with emotional behavioral disorders. Now, these are, first, we have the conduct disorder. Now, this is characterized by disobedience, being disruptive, getting into fights, being bossy, and temper tantrums. Now, next is the anxiety withdrawal, sometimes called as anxiety disorder. And it is manifested by social withdrawal, anxiety, depression, feelings or inferiority, guiltness or guilt, shyness, and happiness. Next, we have the immaturity. Immaturity shows in short attention span, extreme passivity, daydreaming, preference for younger playmates, and clumsiness. Next, we have the socialized aggression. Now, the socialized aggression is marked by truancy, gang membership, theft, and feeling of pride and belonging to a delinquent subculture. Now, this social aggression is rampant among adolescents. Aggression and acting out are that is the last one, the fourth, social aggression. Now, aggression and acting out are the major characteristics of quiz conduct disorder and socialized aggression categories. Now, a significant finding in the study showed that the clusters of behavior appearance in groups rather than singly. Now, the social aggression is usually makikita natin sa mga adolescent in groups rather than singly. And thus, there is a higher incidence of conduct disorder in a child who shows anxiety, withdrawal, immaturity, or social aggression. As I've said kanina, mostly ito silang mga classification ni QUI, statistical classification, or the 4 clusters of conducts and traits. These are usually makikita natin sa mga groups na ng mga tao rather than in singly individual, no. Next classification is we have the classification of direct observation and measurement. Now, in this classification, we have 5 dimensions of the child's display of the disordered behaviors and are observed, measured, and analyzed. First, we have the frequency. The frequency indicates the rate at which the behaviors occur and how often a particular behavior is performed. Now, normally, disobedience, temper tantrums, shyness, clumsiness, and unhappiness are displayed by most children. However, a child with emotional and behavioral disorders engages in the undesirable behavior most of the time and shows normal behavior less often. Now, yun daw mga children with emotional and behavioral disorders, mostly they engage in the not so appropriate behaviors rather than the normal individuals or the normal children. Next dimension is we have the duration. Now, duration is a measure of length and amount of time a child exhibit the disordered behaviors. Na ito yung time na amount of time that a child exhibits the disordered behaviors like the temper tantrums. Now, the length and amount of time spent in the undesirable behavior is longer and may last for an hour or more. Yung mga tantrums nila ng mga bata with emotional and behavioral disorders. Normal children display temper tantrums for no more than a few minutes. Now, with children with emotional and behavioral disorders, they're more sensitive in their emotions. Now, hindi nila agad makokontrol ang kanilang mga emotions. Now, there is a time that ang kanilang mga temper tantrums is more longer than a normal individual or a normal child. Next, you have the topography. Now, topography refers to the physical shape or form of the behavior. For example, running a race and walking each has its own topography. Although their legs are used in both motor activities, running has its own snap or topography that differs from walking. Now, may sariling shape or may sariling topography ang runnings kaysa sa walking ng isang child that has emotional and behavioral disorder. Now, the topography of the behaviors displayed by children with emotional and behavioral disorders deviate from the normal. Deviate, it means na differ sila. Mas iba sila sa normal na mga tao, normal children. They are maladaptive, bizarre, or dangerous to the child himself and others. Sa mga bata na may emotional and behavioral disorders, usually mas aggressive sila kaysa sa mga bata na normal lang. Now, they are maladaptive bizarre means mas ano sila, mas aggressive, um, mas hindi sila makontrol. And it is dangerous for themselves and for others kasi may tendency na pwede silang makapanakit ng ibang tao rather than hurting themselves. Next dimension is the magnitude. Now, the magnitude refers to the intensity of the displayed behavior. Now, in magnitude, for example, this is the intensity of the behavioral disorder, displayed behavior of of a child with emotional and behavioral disorder. For example, the magnitude of one's aggressive behavior may have a high magnitude or intensity, so that the whole class is affected. So the one child with emotional and behavioral disorder, so the intensity of its emotion or the aggressiveness can affect the whole class. Pwede siya mag-cause ng chaos, pwede siya makapanakit ng iba. So it can affect the whole class. And a person who threatens to commit, for example for a person who threatens to commit suicide by jumping off a tall building or hostage victim displays a disruptive behavior of high intensity. So the magnitude of one's displayed behavior or aggressive behavior may have a high chance with a child with or a person with emotional and behavioral disorder. And lastly, the last dimension we have is the stimulus control. Now, the stimulus control refers to the inability to select an appropriate response to a stimulus. Now, the child has difficulty in selecting the correct behavior in a social situation. Now, in the class, where all the students are expected to listen while the teacher explains the lesson, no, kapag normal lang ang mga ibang students, nahihirapan ang isang child with emotional and behavioral disorder to show or to what to do in a social situation like in a class na nandun sila lahat. The child with emotional and behavioral disorder may engage in disruptive behavior such as shouting, hitting seatmates, and similar inappropriate responses to the class activity. So, pwede to siya sa mga person with ADHD, di ba? They cannot sila makapuyo sa isa ka place. So they tend to do things that is inappropriate or that is irrelevant sa klase. So they tend to draw attention to themselves. So magbuhat sila og mga bagay na kanang dili kailangan sa isa ka klase. So they hit or shout sa isa ka klase, so they can cause chaos or maka-distract sila sa klase. So that is a stimulus control. Hindi makontrol sa isang bata with emotional behavior ang kanyang response sa isang social situation. Now, we have the last classification of the systems in emotional behavior. Now, this is the classification of the degree of the severity. Now, in the degree of the severity, this is indicated in the EBD or the emotional behavior disorder, and it can be mild or severe. Now, the children who respond positively to therapy and intervention have a mild level or degree of emotional disorder. So So yung mga bata or mga person with EBD or emotional behavior disorders, or those are who are in the mild level, are those who positively respond to therapy. So meron silang mga positive feedback that gives them the hope that they can be better in their amidst their emotional behavior disorder. Now, if with the person or with the children who are with EBD, they can attend class or work successfully with a regular and special education and teacher and the guidance counselor. However, those who have severe emotional and behavioral disorders require intense treatment and intervention. They require mas intense na treatment, like they have to be monitored every now and then the intervention or the ways that they should be assessed should be intense rather than mild like other children. Now that is all for my report. I hope you have learned something about the EBD or the classification of the emotional behavioral and disorders. Once again, I am Cristiana Job Fertes, and that is all. Thank you.